Apple's foldable iPhone just crossed a very interesting line. Not because Apple announced anything, they didn't, but because for the first time, we can actually hold something that feels close to what Apple is building. And before we go any further, I want to be very clear about one thing. What you're looking at here is not a real Apple device. This is a three-dimensional printed mock-up created by a tech YouTuber at MacRumors based on the most consistent leaks and analyst reports we have right now. And that credit matters because this is the closest thing to an early hands-on experience we're likely to get for a while. Now, the moment people hear foldable iPhone, expectations go wild. People imagine something radical, something futuristic, something Apple waited years to perfect, but once you actually look at this mock-up, something surprising happens. It doesn't feel experimental, it feels deliberate, almost conservative, and that's where this story gets interesting. According to current leaks, Apple's foldable iPhone would measure roughly 5.4 inches when closed and about 7.6 inches when fully opened. And immediately that tells us Apple isn't chasing what Samsung did with tall, narrow outer screens. They're not even copying Google's early Pixel Fold approach exactly. Instead, Apple seems to be aiming for something shorter, wider, and more familiar when closed, and much more like a compact iPad when opened, and honestly that might be the smartest move they could make. When you hold this mock-up closed, it doesn't feel like a weird, compromised phone. It feels like a slightly chunky, very normal smartphone. Wider than what Samsung does, shorter than what most foldables attempt. When you open it up, the experience shifts completely. This suddenly feels less like a stretched phone and more like a mini tablet, and that distinction matters more than people realize. Apple has always been obsessed with use states. The closed state has to feel complete on its own. The open state has to justify its existence, and this form factor quietly does both. Now let's talk about materials, because this is where Apple's long delay starts to make sense. Reports are all over the place here. Some analysts suggest a titanium chassis, others say a mix of titanium and aluminum. Ming-Chi Kuo points towards stainless steel combined with titanium, especially around the hinge. Jeff Pu leans more toward aluminum-titanium blends. And here's the key thing. The disagreement itself tells us Apple is still fine-tuning the balance between weight, durability, and cost. The hinge is the real story. Foldables live and die by their hinges. Apple reportedly plans to use liquid metal components manufactured through a die casting process, specifically to reduce stress points and eliminate creasing. If that sounds over-engineered, that's because it is, and that's exactly why Apple waited. They don't want a better crease, they want no visible crease at all. And yes, on this 3D printed mock-up, the crease is obvious, it's ugly, it even gives off Microsoft Surface Duo vibes, but that's actually helpful because it highlights what Apple is trying to avoid. The final product, if these reports are accurate, would use a metal dispersion plate beneath the display to control bending stress. That's not cheap, that's not fast, but it's very Apple. On the back, things look familiar, almost reassuringly so. A horizontal camera bar stretching across the phone, much like current iPhone Pro designs. Two cameras, wide and ultra-wide, and I know some people will be disappointed here. No telephoto lens means this isn't a full Pro camera system, but step back for a second and think about Apple's positioning. This foldable isn't trying to replace the Pro Max, it's trying to create a new category between phone and tablet. And that's why two cameras actually make sense, even if it doesn't sound exciting. Security is another quiet shift. Multiple leaks suggest Apple will skip Face ID on this first generation foldable and instead integrate Touch ID into the power button. That button placement is still questionable. It looks a bit high on the mock-up, but functionally, Touch ID and a power button works. Apple already proved that on iPads. This feels less like a downgrade and more like Apple choosing reliability over flash. Again, once you open the device, everything clicks. The inner display is rumored to be close to 7.7 inches with a 4:3 aspect ratio, and that ratio is a huge clue. 4 to 3 is iPad territory. That's the aspect ratio Apple already optimizes for multitasking, split view, and productivity. This isn't just a folding phone, this is a portable iPad experience that happens to close. Software will make or break this product. Apple absolutely cannot ship this with a stretched version of iOS and call it a day. Reports strongly suggest Apple is working on a hybrid experience, something that behaves like iOS when closed and shifts closer to iPadOS when opened. How exactly they'll handle apps, scaling, and multitasking is still unclear, but Apple has one massive advantage here. Developers already build for both environments. Pricing is where reality hits. Current estimates place this device somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 in the United States. Some analysts believe Apple could push it closer to $1,800 if hinge costs come down, which Ming-Chi Kuo now believes they might. Whether that savings lowers the price or simply boosts Apple's margins is an open question. But one thing is certain, this will be the most expensive iPhone Apple has ever sold, and yet it will probably sell. Not because everyone wants a foldable, but because Apple users trust Apple to wait until something works. This device doesn't feel like Apple chasing a trend. It feels like Apple finally deciding the technology is mature enough to carry their name. So no, this isn't a flashy reveal, it's not a dramatic leap forward, it's something more subtle and more dangerous to competitors. A foldable that feels familiar, a device that doesn't ask you to adapt your habits, it simply expands them. And that's the real takeaway here. Apple's foldable iPhone isn't trying to impress you in a spec comparison. It's trying to disappear into your workflow, and if Apple pulls that off, this category changes overnight.